Is the title an oxymoron? Yes. Am I also a moron? Debatable. But is my claim also true? Oh, I certainly think so, and let me explain why. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a deep game with a bunch of rules, mechanics, and systems. But the way they're implemented makes the game run incredibly smooth if you use the tools it gives you correctly. Picture this very common scenario. You, as a player, want to do something. The GM makes something up on the spot to allow you to attempt the thing you want to do. Dice are rolled, people cheer, doves fly, and everyone's happy. Great, right? Here's where it gets messy. 3 weeks later, you want to do the thing again. Your GM is not a supercomputer and has no idea what method they used to adjudicate it 3 weeks ago, if they remember it happening at all. They pull something out of their ass that likely isn't the same thing they did last time, especially if circumstances have changed. Let's say the action in question is to disarm an enemy. There are two outcomes to this situation. The DM's inability to calculate every single detail of every session they have ever run in their entire lifetime means they're probably going to have a different rolling. If that's the case, there's no consistency. You never have any idea if your character is capable of disarming an enemy until the moment you ask the GM and the GM slaps down some mechanics. Maybe you had a high chance last week, and this week, maybe you have almost no chance with no real explanation as to why. The second outcome is you do remember how the GM ruled it last time, and you bring it up. The GM is either going to not remember or roll it differently depending on what's changed, or agree with you and do it the same way. In that case, you and your GM have just created a new role. Congrats. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it continually happens with a bunch of different fairly basic concepts, what did you actually pay for when you bought the system in the first place? Pathfinder 2nd Edition has a disarm action, and a trip action, and an action for leaping and climbing, and it's a long list. It's easy to look at that list and scoff that the system is bogged down with a bunch of unnecessary constricting rules, but you would be completely wrong. They are neither unnecessary nor constricting. They are necessary because if they weren't there, your DM is going to invent one anytime you want to do an action that the rules don't cover. They aren't constricting because the rules are as much a law of logic in how the game world functions as they are words on a sheet of paper. Since the disarm action exists, you can take feats specifically to bolster your character's ability to disarm. You can rest safely in the knowledge that your character is good at disarming enemies, and that it's always a viable tactic without relying on what the GM says. That's how the world in Pathfinder works. Predictable despite the dice. You can always jump X amount of distance if you have X amount of speed. Drawing an item is always one action unless you take something to change it, and that applies to those enemy goblins the same way it does to you. That consistency allows you to account for it, for yourself, and how you approach an enemy. Now, there may be a learning curve, but that's not the same thing as being complicated, crunchy, or obtuse. The unchanging nature of these actions means that once you or any part of your group learns them, they're consistent. If you can't remember them, you can always print out a cheat sheet or just reference the rulebook. Do you know what's more complicated? That role not existing in the first place and trying to play a character that's subject to the whims of the ever-changing chaos of a world that exists without rhyme or reason. It's trying to remember a made-up ruling that was likely not all that balanced in the first place because the GM made it up on the fly with 5 billion other things to track while also entertaining 2 to 5 other people. It's a lot less complicated for the GM too. Adjudicating how the players can attempt actions not covered by the rules is one of the things that makes tabletop role-playing games great. It's the fact that the players aren't constrained by the rules by themselves and can try things not covered by them. But it's the existence of those rules that makes it more magical when those things happen. I don't need to spend any mental willpower to adjudicate simple common actions like climbing, disarming, or tripping. The game has me covered already. That frees up my think tank to tackle the more uncommon ideas that players come up with. Since Pathfinder 2nd Edition already has an extensive framework of actions, I also have examples of how to make those things happen in a way that's consistent with the rest of the game. The fact of the matter is, mechanical rules exist whether you have a book full of them or none at all. If there isn't a rule for it, the GM is making one up on the fly, even if it's only ever used once. It's the same thing, applying mechanics for you to roll on. I know a lot of fans of 2nd Edition still hand-wave or just ignore rules they don't like or believe are cumbersome, but I think that's a mistake a lot of the time unless you have designed a homebrewed replacement that applies to the whole table and the game to maintain consistency. If that's the case, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a homebrewer myself. But it's important to understand that the rules aren't there to bog you down. If you use them as intended, it makes the game move along at a much steadier pace. With the rules, you know how to jump, you know how to engage in diplomacy, you know how to hide in the bushes, and there's no question about it, it's written out for you. The word rules has a negative connotation, and for good reason. Rules, by definition, basically mean something that must be followed, a restriction. So it's easy to think that the more rules a game has, the worse it is, the more complicated it is. But the reality is that the rules are just simple mechanics that allow you to do what you want, not stop you. It's like saying 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a rule. You are technically correct, but the rule of mathematics, or called law if you're a normie, allows you to utilize math in the first place. A bicycle following the rule, or law of physics, is what makes it so that you can ride it without planting your face on the pavement. Wouldn't bicycles be more complicated if you never had any idea what was going to happen when you started pedaling? How complex would life be if math was inconsistent or random? What if one day 2 plus 2 equaled 4 and another it equaled 16? Now that doesn't mean that every rule in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is perfect. It was still designed by fallible human beings. But it was designed to offer you a balanced and consistent system to run your games instead of solely relying on a single overworked but also fallible human called your GM. It's the spinning cogs powering your machine of might and magic. Rules shouldn't be a dirty word. Embrace them. Otherwise, I'd have to wonder why you're playing a game at all.